Welcome back to another episode of Harlem Stories. I'm Robert Lazo.
I'm Adam Feinberg.
And this episode, we're going to be talking about washer and dryer installations. So oftentimes when we are showing apartments to people and they notice that there is not a washer and dryer in the apartment, inevitably they will ask, can I install one?
And the answer to that is often no.
Wait a minute. Why are you saying no right away? Whatever happened to the answer, it depends?
Well, it does depend, but but I want to explain, some of the complexities that are involved because, the vast majority of buyers are just going to ask the question. I'm like, why won't the board allow me to install a washer dryer? And if the building is already kind of set up for it, then the answer might be it depends. But but washer dryers tend to be complex. Let's focus the majority of this conversation mostly on the washer side, and the reason why dryers they tend to be easier because you can put them in a closet, and especially if they're electric in their nature, you can put them anywhere. They don't require ventilation. Now, those that are gas-driven do require ventilation, and it either needs to vent to the roof or outside the building somehow. So, that is one of the complications, but that's, usually in most cases, buildings would be required to vent on like the side of the building, not the front of the building. That is New York City housing codes, and that goes back to the Department of Buildings. But in terms of dryers, that's usually as complex as it winds up getting. If there is no ventilation to the roof, then it's got to go throughout the window. And very often, to vent to the roof, which is usually gas dryers, it's usually a quicker drying time, although I've been hearing more about new technologies in dryers that have allowed the faster drying times without it venting to the roof or a window. So that's usually as complex as dryers get, but it's usually washers that are the bigger deal.
So what's the issue with washers?
So washing machines, number one, they require a plumbing source. And in New York City, first off, to understand, and the same applies to whether you're talking about kitchens or bathrooms as well, most buildings have rules that are called wet over dry rules. And you're probably asking yourself, what are wet over dry rules? Well, basically it amounts to any kind of wet space where you're going to have plumbing. It needs to be, especially since we're living in vertical worlds and apartments, you need to do wet over wet, which means like a kitchen over a kitchen or a kitchen over a bath, but some other wet space. As opposed to most buildings aren't going to allow wet over dry, which might mean putting a kitchen or a bathroom over somebody's bedroom. And what happens if it leaks? So imagine the place where somebody says, oh, I wanted to add a bathroom or wanted to add a washing machine, over here, and they want to put it over a dry space. Well, what happens if it leaks? Somebody could be sleeping and all of a sudden they're flooded and their entire ceiling comes down on top of them, and, water as well, while they're sleeping. That's the first component about the wet over wet rule. So first off, you definitely need to, find a place that will allow for that. Now, sometimes it's a closet, right next to the kitchen, and they'll allow you to waterproof that. And there might even be lines that permit that. So that's the first component of, of understanding the aspects of potentially putting in a washing machine. So that's number one. Number two, there is going to be a lot of times buildings might say, you know what, can from an engineering standpoint, can our building, allow this many appliances on the plumbing line, or is it going to be too great of a pressure that are going to be on the lines? And if you don't have the proper, in essence, piping and plumbing in line for for the waste, as it comes down, as a washing machine tends to put a lot of pressure on the system, well, that could wind up causing a problem. But in addition, washing machines also need what's called a Suds Zone. And what winds up happening is as the soap from the laundry detergent suds up, it winds up putting additional pressure as opposed to, let's say, just having a regular sink, adding an additional sink or changing things over on that aspect. So that can add additional pressure on the line, and if the pressure is not set up for it and the width of the plumbing, what's called a plumbing waste stack, if it is not set up for that kind of pressure and that width is not appropriate and you don't have the appropriate ventilation put in line, what will happen, you're going to have leaks. And when we're talking vertical environment, it might not necessarily leak just on one floor. It could wind up leaking onto multiple floors. So, these are some of the issues that wind up coming in terms of washer dryers, but and specifically washing machines. But in addition, it could just be like, what if the building permits washer dryers in some units and other units have not been set up on it? Again, you're going to need an engineer to evaluate to see if the plumbing, can support it. But let's say even if the plumbing might be able to support it, you might have board members that say, you know what, we don't want or need these potential headaches because now what happens if there's too much pressure on the lines and we're going to potentially cause problems in other people's apartments. Maybe it does cause problems, maybe it doesn't. But as a board member, I'm an unpaid volunteer. And it's my time that everyone is going to come up to me screaming and yelling about problems, whether they wind up causing flooding or not. It could wind up backing up into your toilet. All of a sudden, your toilet winds up getting sudsy. So, these are some of the complexities that come into play. And a board member might say, you know what, because of the complexities here, I don't want to deal with it. And maybe our plumbing can handle it. Maybe it won't. But certainly if a building might be willing to allow it, they might actually request you to hire for the board to hire an engineer at your expense because you're the one that wants to put in the washing machine.
So, in other words, just to reiterate what we were saying is, again, to the question, can I install a washer and dryer? And the answer is no, because, most likely no, unless it has been, the plumbing allows for it. And if you're not being told up front that the plumbing allows for it, the chances are the answer is no.
Right. And you might even, I've seen instances of where I've met listing brokers that have said, well, the building might permit you to put a washing machine over here. Well, a lot of times you're not going to get a straight answer from that during the purchase process. You have to be an owner to be able to find that out. You might have to hire that engineer to make that determination. So just because they've allowed it in the past, for certain lines that are above or below you, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get approved. So it leaves a very big open question mark unless you specifically have instructions from the board that have said, yes, we are willing to permit it. And your purchase is made on that basis.
So again, most likely you'll all be already informed in the listing if washer and dryer is allowed. If it isn't stated, most likely the answer will be no.
Yeah, very often, if it's not stated, that's usually the kind of expectation for it. But still, buyers are going to ask, and we're going to follow up on it. But at the same time, I love to set the expectation up front and say, you know what, the answer is most likely no. But you know what, let's ask and find out for sure. But a lot of times we might not necessarily get a clear answer.
And maybe does not mean yes. So don't think that maybe means that maybe yes. It probably means maybe no.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something that you're going to want to take into consideration. And depending on what neighborhood and where you are in Manhattan, I mean, the value of the washer dryer could wind up meaning a six-figure difference in the price. Just for that flexibility of having that. Same thing like adding like a half bathroom or a full bathroom, the price differential for something that doesn't actually require a whole lot of space can add a whole lot of value because there are so few opportunities at a certain price point at that. And it's not like you can add a half bathroom or washer dryer or a full bathroom in just any location.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.